one of my earliest memories is literally I would have been about 4 or 5 years old and really wanting a Barbie doll, like being desperate for a Barbie doll. And my mother said no, not until Barbie had a real job. So it really was kind of working in tech where I saw these great, male developers who are making tons of money and not speaking to any women candidates. Like, where are all the women? Like, what's happening? Like, why don't I have women hiring managers?
I didn't question it. I was in my early 20s and I was just like, oh, cool. Now, if somebody says not the right culture fit, I will pick up the phone and I'll be like, can you explain?
We need these different perspectives, but you have to talk about it. You're not going to make progress unless you talk about it, and talk about it in a very honest and intentional way. If I don't change this, my son in 30 years will be having the same conversations.
Stephanie, welcome to the Sisterhood Club podcast. I am honoured to be speaking with you today. We were just having a little laugh and a joke before we hit record about how what we're about to speak about today is very needed. And I'm certainly getting asked a lot of questions from some of the clients, the companies that I'm working with. So I'm really, really excited to dive into yourself, your experience and your role at Canva today. But before we dive into it all, can you give a little bit of an intro into who you are, your background and your journey? So over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Georgie. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our chat today. So, I guess a little bit about me. My name's Stephanie Zuniga-Maher. Originally, I'm from Washington, D.C., but I've lived here in Sydney for about almost 21 years now. So I didn't come when I was a child. I came as an adult, so hopefully not giving away my age. But I guess over the last 20 years, I have spent about 15 years working in agency recruitment, all in IT and tech recruitment. And now I've moved into a role at Canva as a diversity, equity, and inclusion partner. Before my role as a DEI partner, I worked as a talent inclusion partner. And before Canva, I was at a company called Splunk as a internal recruiter or talent acquisition person. So lots of experience within talent and within the tech industry. I think I'm really passionate about it after spending so long in it, but then it's one of those things where I never actually thought I would work in tech, despite all of my roles in my career being tech roles, except for maybe one or two. So it's been quite the journey.
Amazing. Well, we've definitely got that, I guess, thing in common with agency recruitment, because I've been doing it for 10 years now in technology. And look, I'd love to dive into that because I don't know about you, but my experience within agency recruitment, especially in technology, was, I reckon, for the first 3 years of my career, I didn't speak to one woman. That could be a bit of an exaggeration, but a very small percentage, right? And I remember thinking to myself at the time, because I actually came from a beauty background. So I had traveled around Europe, worked in spas. So I was very used to working with women. And then I transitioned into tech recruitment. And I just remember thinking, I can't remember last time I spoke to a woman. Like, where are all the women? And at the same time, I was placing men into these fantastic roles. They were being paid amazing salaries. And I thought, this is such a fantastic career for women, but where are they all? So I'd love to know your journey and what got you passionate about bringing more diversity into technology.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely had that light bulb moment one day when I was recruiting for a telco client who will remain nameless, but if they're watching this, they probably know who they are. And I just realized there was like one woman hiring manager that I like, just one. And I couldn't remember the last time I placed a woman with them. I couldn't even remember the last time they interviewed a woman. It was just all men. And so that was one light bulb moment. But I guess if you really want to talk about kind of how I became interested in DEI and diversity, just in general. So I guess from a very early age, my mother was extremely influential in this whole kind of working women at work sphere. She is an absolute powerhouse. Her friends all had high-powered careers. She went to an all-women's college. So from a very early age, I was surrounded by women who worked as lawyers, judges, doctors, had like professional careers. And one of my earliest memories is literally being, I would have been about 4 or 5 years old and really wanting a Barbie doll, like being desperate for a Barbie doll. And my mother said no, not until Barbie had a real job. And
Oh.
so my very first Barbie doll was Date and Night Barbie. She came with a business suit and a briefcase, but then she took off her jacket and she had like a cocktail dress underneath. And she had this little like home office, like it was an office on one side, a house on the other side. And literally, I was like, she is the pinnacle of what I think my life will be. Now, of course, fast forward a number of years, and that's not quite how it turned out. But that kind of role model and imagery of like women work outside the home, women have careers. That was something that was always a part of my, my growing up, my life. Um, Also, in terms of my childhood and my schooling, I went to a school where the individual was really championed. So diversity from a cultural, from an ethnicity, from a religious point of view, it was one of the tenets of the school. It was everyone's equal, nobody's different. Half my friends were Jewish, half my friends were Muslim, half my friends were, Christian. So I just lived in this kind of melting pot of society where women had high-powered careers. Everyone was a different religion and a different kind of racial background. When you look at my friends from high school, we look like a United Colors of Benetton ad. You have, the black girl, the Hispanic girl, the Asian girl. We're all kind of very different ethnically and racially. And I thought that was how the world worked. I mean, that was what I knew growing up. It was only kind of growing, I guess, becoming an adult, moving to Australia, starting to work, that I kind of realized that, like, hang on a second, all of these things that I thought were history. I studied women's studies in college. So I thought, women's liberation has been won. We're all equal. Everything's great. Became an adult and was like, hang on, that's not quite true. Like, why is this not true? And why is this not what I was promised as a child? And so it really was kind of working in tech where like you, I saw these great, male developers who are making tons of money and not speaking to any women candidates. Like, where are all the women? Like, what's happening? Like, why don't I have women hiring managers? And, I did a lot of recruitment in state government, a lot of recruitment in banking and finance, and you would get the odd, it's project managers and program managers who were, but a lot of them didn't necessarily have that coding background, that development background. They sort of came through either a BA point of view or they had very different career paths than a lot of the men who I was placing. And as much as I want to say that, that those were equally prized, you could see that people were paying a premium as well for men who came from technical backgrounds with the coding skills. And it was very kind of subtly said that, oh no, they're more technical, so they can be a technical program manager. They know that. Whereas that wasn't the experience that the women were having. So it was kind of all of these things came together. And literally when I got back from maternity leave in 2017, which I have another story about that, but but it was this moment I was like, hang on a second, there aren't enough women in tech. What's happening? And the combination of going through my own life change, my own kind of change in perception and awareness, combined with getting back to work and thinking, if I don't change this, my son in 30 years will be having the same conversations. Maybe he won't, but that this will never go away unless people act and do something. And then, of course, the question becomes, what do you do? And that's the big $35 billion question. How do we get more women into tech?
First and foremost, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so inspiring when I hear stories like that, because I think it's so important for women, especially, to hear that, because it's so complex. And my business partner, Pam, who is actually on her way to Scotland as we speak, but she's a mum of 2 girls. And she sometimes, and she won't mind me saying this because we talk a lot about it and she shared on the podcast as well, but she shares a lot about like that whole mum guilt about, some days she's prioritizing her business and her career, and some days, maybe she sort of drops the ball a little bit, and she feels really badly about that. And I don't have kids, so I'm always saying to her, listen, what you do and how you act is so important. And Emily and Sky, those girls watching you get dressed, go to work, run a business every day, it's honestly the biggest gift that I believe you can give your children, because it installs those values into them. It installs work ethic. It is that role model that they look up to. And what really got me, I guess, a bit fired up during COVID in particular, was I was doing a lot of reading at that time. Didn't have much else to do a lot of the time, so I was really reading and researching. And one of the stats that I was absolutely petrified by was the amount of women that will leave in the workforce because of the amount of responsibility and stress that was on their plate. And I thought to myself, oh God, we are going to take a big step back, and those younger children are going to watch mum stay at home. Again, nothing wrong with that, but I think it's something that we need to be aware of. What impact is that going to have on their future? So that was a really big moment for me to be like, okay, what am I going to do? And how can we support women? Because the other thing I read the other day was the amount of women now looking to freeze their eggs because they want to have a career, but they don't have the support to go and have a career. They're thinking, okay, well, childcare is this much a month. My salary would be this much a month. What's the point of going back to work? So it's so complex, Stephanie, and I don't have all the answers. But what I want to transition in and speak to you now about is, like, Canva being such a huge organization that it is now. I'm sure that they are thinking about these issues and thinking about ways that, as a business they can help. And obviously they've brought you in to discuss these very things and hopefully find some solutions. So what are some of the things that we could be doing as society, as organizations, to be supporting women and to make sure that we don't have this gap getting bigger and bigger, and we're not still talking about this in 30 years' time? So,
Yeah,
thoughts?
I think, and look, it is such a great question, and it's such a big,
Oh,
complex issue.
huge.
And I think one of the things that we have to stop doing, and everyone's guilty of this, is treating women as a monolith. Not all women are the same. Not all women want
Yes.
to become mothers. Not all women have the same opportunities. So I think we need to start we need to take a really intersectional lens on women's experiences. And we need to almost look at the women at the margins, not just the women who are, I guess, quote unquote, mainstream, cisgender, married white women who are doing whatever they're doing because they've gone to a great private school. So I think we
100%.
need to look at, this intersectionality of women's experiences. I had the absolute privilege yesterday of organizing a panel on women in the criminal justice system. And it was so interesting to hear to hear from a woman who had been to prison about her experiences. And she's now created a digital resource to help other women who are in a similar situation. And I think, when we talk about women, we're talking about 52% of the world, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
We can't lump everyone in the same basket, because not everyone has the same challenges. So I think, one of the things that we're trying to do at Canva is also to think about all of these different intersections and look at women across different life stages. You mentioned egg freezing, and I think, that is something that, having gone through IVF myself, having gone through a fertility journey, I wish someone had told me at 24 to think about it. I wish someone had told me at 29 or 30 that this could be an issue. But it's something that I think women, especially young women, we spend so much time focused almost on the wrong thing. And again, not to put any kind of judgments on people or things like that, but we focus on one thing, but we don't necessarily realize what life might look like in 10, 20, 30 years and kind of look at that bigger picture of, when I was, I guess, in my 20s and 30s, it was like, oh no, I need to find a husband. I want to find a husband. I want to have a career. That's going to be the end all be all of happiness. Then I'll be an adult, kid, mortgage, husband, all of those things. Of course, now looking back as a 43-year-old, it's like, I should have been more specific. I should have been more specific about what did I want for a career? Like, what's actually going to bring me joy? And, how am I going to work with my partner in a family, not just having a partner? So it's, again, all of these things that we don't necessarily think about, but the wisdom of years and experience kind of gives
Mm.
us that depth. And I think one of the important things for any company to do is to think about women who are in your workforce not as a monolith, but at all of these different life stages, life journeys, these intersections of race, these intersections of disability and ability, these intersections of neurodiversity, all these intersections, and really support women across all of these different kind of spectrums of experience.
Mm. That is such solid advice because I think, yeah, people sort of tend to just sort of like put us all in one group, and we're not, because like you said there, some women don't want to have children, some want to have one, two, big families. And I always think as well, it's like from somebody, I mean, I don't have children, and I always get asked, oh, when are you thinking about having a child? And I'm like, how do you know I haven't been trying for the last 10 years, which I haven't, by the way. But it's such an inappropriate question to ask. And I think that our whole approach needs to change as a society about the way we treat women. And, I think there was a really good movement around like girl boss and women empowerment. I think that's all has its place. But I think we need to now move away from that and start listening to women's different perspectives and start actually not assuming. I think we're so quick as a society to assume, but I think we need to do more listening, because that's how we're going to learn and that's how we're going to move forward. So your role at Canva, um, that's such an incredible role, and I can imagine gives you a lot of fulfillment. What you were just saying then about joy and fulfillment, and certainly wasn't something I gave much thought to in my 20s. All I cared about was, making money, and I soon quickly realized that that was not the answer to happiness. In fact, if anything, it was completely the opposite. And I was working myself into the ground, extremely anxious and stressed, and very high expectations for myself and things. But your role at Canva sounds absolutely incredible. Talk to me about what that involves. Like, what does a typical day look like in your role at Canva? Because the title is incredible and it just sounds like such a awesome role.
Look, I am so fortunate that I get to work in my absolute dream role in such a great company and such a great organization surrounded by amazing, amazing people. So I am, number one, super fortunate, super grateful. My role at Canva, I would say there are no 2 days that look the same, because there's so many different things that we want to do.
Mm.
And diversity cuts across so many different aspects of life for our Canvanauts, for our team. So, and I think it's also, diversity is amazing because it keeps evolving.
Mm.
It's not right, we're diverse and we're done. There's always something more to learn. There's always something more to do. There are always new groups that are finding their voice. So a lot of what my role entails, I do a lot of listening, do a lot of kind of planning and thinking, and how can we make life at Canva better for certain groups of people? How can we attract more women? How can we make Canva more accessible? How can we basically make Canva a place where everyone belongs? And it's a global
Mm.
company. We have a product that can be used by everyone around the world. How do we make sure that we reflect that
Mm.
global, I guess, not global usage, but how do we make sure that we are the company that we want to be, I suppose,
Mm.
is a way of saying it. But it's an absolute amazing place to work, and the field of diversity, equity, inclusion is fascinating.
Mm.
Um, and I think it really comes down to as well, like everyone has their own identity and identity markers and intersections. And it's not just about, right, we need to hire more women into tech.
Mm.
It's how do we make sure that a woman with a disability who might be a First Nations woman has an equitable experience at
Mm.
Canva or at any company to someone who is, a man who has no disabilities, who is from a European background? How do we make sure that that experience is equitable? How do we level the playing field? What do we need to do to support everyone at Canva? Because again, I think when you design for the edge, then
Mm.
automatically you're including more people, like you build a more inclusive company.
God, that is such a fantastic way of looking at it. And, I hadn't thought about that before. So how do you do that? Because I know there's going to be a lot of people, and look, I'm sure you're still experimenting, but there must be things that you're working on that you go, that's working really well, that didn't work so well. Because this honestly is a question that comes up so much with so many the hiring managers that I speak to, and we'll get onto it as well, because a lot of the managers that we work with are men, and I often get asked as well, like, Georgie, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells a bit. I don't know what's right, what's wrong. So that's a whole other conversation in itself I'd love to go into. But what are some of the things that Canva are doing that are working really well? And, for those companies that aren't Canva, because you've got such a fantastic name and brand, there's not a person in the world, I don't think now, that doesn't know what Canva is and what Canva does. I use it every single day in my business. It's fantastic.
Yep.
So yeah, what's working, and what advice would you have for businesses wanting to improve their diversity and inclusion efforts, that maybe don't have the brand that Canva does? Any thoughts?
Look, I think one of the things that works really well is to actually talk about it and to have the conversations, to actually have unconscious bias training, to actually talk about, what are our diversity, like, what do we want to accomplish in terms of diversity? And that's really a conversation about who's being left out, who's not being included. How can we not necessarily, and again, diversity isn't a goal, because diversity is a concept. Like, you'll never get to diversity. Like, we're never going to be 100% diverse and we're done and we can go home and pack everything up and I'm out of a job. It's a journey that you have to work towards and you have to be intentional about. So I think any company, whether you're Canva, whether you're CBA, whether you're Meta, whether whoever you are, you really have to think about it as a journey and you have to have the conversations. It's not something that you're going to, I guess, improve or work towards if you don't talk about it. And part of my original role at Canva was as a talent inclusion partner. And one of the first things we said was to actually sit down with your hiring manager and have a look at the team. Have a look at what voices are overrepresented in your team and what perspectives might be overrepresented in your team and what might be underrepresented. And one of the things that I think is really interesting as well that people don't necessarily think about is even things as simple as, like, where did your team go to university? Did your team all go to university? If so, where? If you're an Australian company, you may have a high percentage of people who have gone to the same uni. So, if you have, let's say, 10% of your team that's gone to UNSW and it's a tech team, that means 10% of your team has sat in the same first year freshman class, the same foundations of, coding, the same thought patterns. And so you're not getting diversity of thought. You're not getting different perspectives. And then how does that, like, what happens if you have 10 people on your team, and 10% of them, or, 20%, 30%, whatever, went to the same uni? What happens to the other voices in the conversation? Because all of a sudden you have people who are like, no, this is the way to do it. And it's like, this is the only way because everyone agrees. But hang on, there are all these different perspectives that you might be missing out on just because the majority opinion is one thing, because they come from the same college, high school, suburb, all of these things. So I think we really need to be very open and honest about what identity markers we have and what that means for an organization. I mean, we're moving away from hiring for culture fit. That's now a dirty word. Back when I started in agency recruitment, it's like, oh, they just don't fit the culture. And you just kind of took that as like gospel, like, oh, okay, they're not a culture fit. Now we think being a culture add, like, what do people add to the culture? We don't want people to fit in. We don't want to hire the same type of person. We need these different perspectives, but you have to talk about it. You're not going to make progress unless you talk about it, and talk about it in a very honest and intentional way. So that would be my advice for any company that's even starting out on a diversity journey, is just to have that really hard look at yourself.
Absolutely solid advice. And it's funny you said about culture, not culture fit, culture add, because I literally just did a whole post about this the other day. And I just think that you're right. When I first started my career, it was all about, yeah, Georgie, just not the right fit for us. And I was just like, oh, okay. I didn't question it. I was in my early 20s and I was just like, oh, cool. Now, if somebody says not the right culture fit, I will pick up the phone and I'll be like, can you explain? Because I think when you ask somebody to explain what they mean, they are then the spotlight's on them and they're actually thinking, okay, what do I actually mean? What is our culture? Do we have the right culture? Is our culture diverse, or is it, a bit of a bit toxic? Like it starts to kind
Mm.
of like really kind of go, I haven't thought about it like that before. So I think awareness is key, because once you're aware of something, you can change it. But if you're not aware of something, you're never going to be able to change it. You're never going to be able to move forward. So I think that's absolutely solid
And
advice.
I think, and it is hard for agency recruiters, especially to push back on clients, but
Yes.
you have to push back. You have to say, what do you mean? And when the client says, oh, I just wouldn't have a beer with them after work, it's like, hang on,
Yeah.
we're not hiring your next mate. We're hiring someone who can do the job. But again, much like you and me, it's like you don't want to upset the client. You don't want to push too
Mm,
far. You don't want to upset them. And it's a
mm.
real skill to learn how to push back and ask the right questions and to do it in a way that's challenging, but not confrontational.
100%. And that in itself is a huge skill, right? And I was listening to something the other day about the future of hiring, the future of recruitment. And it is all about influence. It's about consulting. It's not about telling, it's about listening and then offering, an alternative opinion, or some advice. Because again, we don't know what we don't know. And the world of work is changing, and companies are now thinking about these things. They're thinking about, okay, it's one thing getting the talent in, but how am I retaining the talent? And these are tough conversations to have with some clients, because some businesses don't want to admit that they maybe have a retention problem and their culture isn't good. And that can be, when you're shining a spotlight on that and you're challenging that, that can be quite triggering. But I think that that actually creates a better bond and more respect between the recruiter or the internal recruiter and the hiring manager, because you're working together as a team. It's a partnership. And that's something that I really work towards when I'm working with clients. It's like, let's partner, because I really want to get the best people for your business, but I want to place these people in your business and them to have a really good experience, because otherwise I'm doing my job, but I'm placing people that are leaving within 3 to 6 months, then that's not worth it for me either, right? So that's the other piece of it, right? So you've got the attraction piece, where I think there's been a lot of work around that, about how we interview, how we write job ads. I think people are very aware of, okay, I need to make sure that my interview questions are the same for every single person. I'm not just sort of going, oh, what's your favorite beer and what do you do for
That's
the
right.
weekend, right? Oh, I like that answer.
Yeah.
So when it comes to then the whole retention and belonging piece, that this is, I think, where maybe the missing piece of the puzzle right now. So what are some of the things, like, well, first and foremost, like, what in your opinion is a good culture? Like, how do you define a good culture? And I think it's something that I've heard really good things about Canva, by the way. So, they must be doing something right. What are some of the things that Canva does well? Maybe some of the things that you still feel, we could still work on that. Like, what are you seeing at Canva and what's working for you?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and to kind of tie it back into where I went to school, is that there's a real respect for the individual and a real respect for people and treating people as who they are. So it's not this expectation. My first job was at IBM. First job out of college, IBM, and it still was in that very much like dark suit, red tie, that kind of
Yeah.
cookie cutter that we all think of as like, yes, this is what you wear and this is what you
Yeah.
do. Um, Canva is almost the polar opposite to that, where, you show up as who you are, you bring your whole self to work, and there's space for you to belong at Canva, no matter who you are, how you believe, how you live your life. Um, my 6-year-old son came to Canva with me. I guess it was last week. Yeah, it was last week. And one of the things he was struck by, and he's obsessed with haircuts. He's like, Mom, that guy has a mohawk. I go, yeah, he does. He's like, like amazing. And he came home and he told my husband, he goes, Dad, did you let people with mohawks work at Canva? And my dad's like, oh, his dad's like, I don't doubt it, son. I don't doubt it. My husband's in a very corporate role, and
Yeah.
it's like, never have a mohawk where he
Yeah. Yeah.
works. And it's like the complete opposite.
Bit of
But
stubble, God
he made
forbid.
Oh, it's like, he shaves on a Monday, he shaves on a
Yeah.
Wednesday,
Yeah, yeah.
Friday, he lets go a little bit, but it's like very much suit tie.
Yeah.
Whereas, we have dogs at Canva, we have
Mm.
cookies at Canva, we have all these
Yeah.
things that you turn up, and even the fact that I can
Mm.
bring my child to work with
Yeah.
me, and, he gets the stickers, he has this whole little thing, he goes around, he's like, what's for lunch? Where are the stickers? I want to pet a dog. But again, that's part of my identity that
Mm.
I can bring with me to work. So I'm not leaving that part of me at the door. In the
Mhm.
same way that people who have dogs don't leave their dogs at the door.
Mm.
People who are from the pride community aren't leaving their identities at the door either. So
Mm.
the fact that Canvas supports everyone to be who they are, and we're empowered to be who we are, to me, that's a good culture. And that's one of the things that we really work towards at Canva. And I think, you do have other companies where I've worked in the past where, there is this pressure to fit in. And what does
Mm.
fitting in, again, in agency recruitment days, it was like, oh, you have to go out for a beer. You have to go out after work. You have to, do this. If you're not social, you're not included. Whereas
Mhm.
that's not what Canva is at all. And I think there's no pressure to change to fit the environment,
Mhm.
and that's, to me, that's a good culture.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I've definitely worked in those environments before where I felt like I had to almost change who I was to fit in and force myself to go out for a drink when I was just like, I just want to go to the gym and go home. Like I've always prioritized health and fitness, and I'm not really a big party girl. But that was kind of part of the culture, and but then you felt like you were missing out. And you weren't getting ahead if you were missing out. And eventually as I got older and as I grew through my career, I ended up just, I didn't have a problem saying no, but to start with, I was definitely forcing myself to do these things because I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be visible. I wanted to, get the recognition. I didn't want to miss out on, the team drinks. It's almost like you want to be part of the popular kids at school, right? That's sort of like, it's kind of, you think, oh God, I left all this in high school, but here I am. So I think that's beautiful. Like if you can just show up as your authentic self, and everyone's showing up as their authentic self, then what a fantastic place to be, because then everyone's bringing their best selves to work.
Exactly.
So I think that's super, super powerful. The one thing that I always just think of is like, the smaller companies that, they want to really do something cool and bring and really focus on culture as well. But on the flip side as well is that this just literally popped into my mind, but talking about hybrid working
Mm.
from home, what I guess I'm for it, right? I live in Torquay. I've got offices in Melbourne CBD. I commute in 1 or 2 days a week, so I'm very much for the hybrid way of working. Where I think people are struggling right now, like some businesses want to bring their employees back 5 days a week because they're like, we feel like we're losing our culture. We feel like we're losing our team morale. What, in your personal opinion, is the right way to deal with this? And again, this is just your thoughts, your opinions. Everyone's got their own view on this, but I am curious to sort of ask a few people of what do you think the best approach is when it comes to hybrid working? Is it fully remote? Is it 5 days back in office, or is it a blend of both?
This is a hot topic in my house.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because my husband works for a commercial property company.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were very much, he's in the office nearly every day, probably 4, maybe even 5 days most weeks.
Right.
Whereas I work from home most days, and I'll go into the office for a reason, for a meeting, for an event, for something. And part of the reason why is because, that's how it works best for me to support my child, and also for me to maximize the time that I have, um, in terms of, being able to do school drop off, come home, work for hours and hours, and
Mm-hmm.
then be there at the end of the day to pick up my son to take him to sport. I This is a hot topic because there's a whole conversation around division of labor and who's actually, who's working hybrid versus who's in the office, and who
Yep.
has the privilege to be able to go into the office. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's a little bit of a conversation in our house around,
Mm-hmm.
I work from home most days because that's what our family needs.
Right.
My husband has the privilege of going out to work because there's someone at home to do the at-home bits.
Mm.
It's a real debate. Personally, I think from a company and an organizational point of view, you have to let people choose, and you have to let
Mm.
people choose what suits them best.
Mm.
I don't buy the argument that in order to collaborate effectively, you have to be sitting face to face.
Mm.
Um, we certainly had, 2 and a bit years of COVID where it was like, well, we can't be face to face. It
Mm.
would be great. And it's always good to get together and to talk to people and see people in person. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
Mm.
And if your culture is so fragile that it's built on face to face interaction, is that a culture problem or is that a person problem or
Mm.
like what's happening there? But I think you have to give people, again, the choice, especially if you're a company that says you can bring your whole self to work, you can work in the way that you want, and we're going to make it easy for you to be you. I think the other piece of hybrid work, because that's really important to think about, is people with disabilities. Is that
Mm.
it's a lot easier for people to be included in the workforce and in working life when they're in an environment that suits them, that's comfortable for them, that's adapted to them.
Mm.
So unless we as a society and as corporates are really going to take those big steps towards disability inclusion, I think hybrid's the way forward and letting
Mm.
people choose how they work best.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% there, and I think it's really interesting what you were just saying then. And I was sort of, my mind was sort of thinking a few things, and I think that you're obviously in a very supportive marriage, and your husband sounds like a great man. I'm sure he's a great man. What I was just thinking then is that with this whole hybrid way of working, if there is a woman right now who was and a husband and a wife, and the husband's like, well, I have to go to work 5 days a week, you have to therefore stay home and work from home. And I think this is, again, a little bit of, I guess, a concern that I hadn't actually given much thought to. So bear with me now. I'm thinking and talking at the same time. But I think it is something to be aware of in our society, in our culture right now, that we don't just fall into this trap of, oh yes, the woman has to stay home and work remote and the man has to go to work 5 days a week, because are we then going backwards in time again? So you've got to do, like you said, Stephanie, what's right for you and your family, but also make sure that then the chores, the home life, the cooking, the cleaning is shared still, because just because you're at home doesn't mean you're not working. So that's the thing
Exactly.
I was just thinking as you were speaking. And I thought, oh, if the husband starts to come home and says, where's my dinner? It's 5 o'clock. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And that's
Mm.
also why it is such a hot topic of conversation
Mm.
and of debate as well. And again, I am very lucky to be married to a lovely man who doesn't come home and demand dinner. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it is a conversation around, look, I'm choosing to do this for our son and so that our son can go to sports and do all these things. However, there is a certain amount of, I guess, privilege that I have in terms of my job being as flexible,
Mm-hmm.
and he has privilege as well in terms of his job being less flexible, but accommodating in some ways so that when I do need to go into the office, he does come home and do, he can work from home. But I think it is really easy to fall back into those traditional gender roles,
Mm.
which is also why I make sure that my son knows that if I'm at my desk, I'm at work.
Yeah.
And so he will come and he'll poke his little head into the Zoom call and he'll wave and everyone kind of knows him. But at the same time, it's like, no, mommy's working. Mommy works from home. And so you can't disturb mommy, just like if daddy is at home, you can't disturb daddy. So he's very clear that,
Mm.
like, this is mommy's office. It's not as fun as the Canva office. It's not not as many bells as whistles, but definitely this is like, he
Mm-hmm.
gets it that mommy is working from home.
Perfect. I think that's the best way about it. And it's all about setting those boundaries and having that clear communication with, whoever's in the house when you're working from home, and just setting yourself up for success when you are working from home as well. But I guess like final question, because I'm conscious of your time, and I'm sure that there's you've got lots of things to do in your role and things. But I've really honestly enjoyed this conversation so much today, and I think that it's just such an important conversation that we've had, and I just think that certain things have come up that I didn't think we would touch upon, but I think it is probably has given people a lot of food for thought, and hopefully reflecting on maybe some of the things and the routines and stuff that's happening in their life right now. But final thing I wanted to sort of really go into, and just this whole women in tech piece as well, going back to that, because it is definitely a shared passion of ours. Like, I've started Sisterhood Club to really bring awareness to women, to give them this platform, this podcast, to elevate their voices and to have these conversations, and just to be vulnerable and real. Like, I just think I'm really over just surface level conversations now, and I think I like to listen to substance and depth, and make me question my thoughts and my norms. So, in your own way, in your own thoughts, what are some of the things that we could all do to encourage the, and to make sure that the future of work, which is always going to have a technical component to it, how can we make sure that it is diverse and inclusive for everybody?
Look, that is such a great question that, again, it's like the $1 billion question or $1 trillion question, probably.
We could get very
Um,
rich if we could answer these questions, right?
Look, it's one of those things where, like, if I had all the answers, I would just write my book and, ride off
Yeah,
into the
yeah,
sunset.
yeah.
Unfortunately, there's no
I
silver
know.
bullet.
No.
I wish I had a whole, bucket full of women in tech, women engineers I could just
Mm.
dole out. I'm sure every agency recruiter and every talent acquisition professional wishes that there was like a magic list of women in tech who are looking for work, who are ready to go. And there's not. And I think, there's so many different things that we can do and that we should do, starting from even speaking to our daughters and speaking to, young girls about careers in tech and kind of what does in tech mean even,
Mm.
and kind of having that awareness and having that kind of thought process to start at the beginning, all the way through to encouraging women to stay in tech and to come back from whether it's mat leave, whether it's whatever, life journey they're on, back into their coding role, back into their role in technology. So I don't think that there's like one silver bullet. Like I don't have an answer. I'm
Mm.
sorry. I don't have all the answers on this one. But I think what we need to do is make sure that in the future, we have people who are diverse, who are interested in tech and able to access the skills and the information that they need to make informed decisions about roles in tech. There was a great podcast, was it 2 days ago, from the ABC about AI and are we just recreating our world as, with racist and sexist AI.
Mm.
And it was really interesting because I think we both have the opportunity to create a better world through tech, but we
Mm.
also have the opportunity or have the danger of recreating all the problems that we have, but with algorithms and data sets and things like
Mm.
that. So I think we need those alternate perspectives or diverse perspectives. And we need to really ensure that we're casting the net as widely as possible when we do our, tech days and tech information sessions and recruitment and all of those things. Because I think it's not just women that are at risk of being excluded. It's people of color, it's people with
So,
disabilities, it's people who are neurodiverse, it's trans people, it's all sorts of people who we risk excluding if we don't get it right.
100%. And yeah, I certainly don't have all the answers either. And I think, but the most important thing is to keep the conversations flowing and to keep these types of, conversations happening, so people can sort of go away and just do whatever their small part can be, whether that's, just being a role model, speaking to their daughters, or speaking to their daughters' friends, or just, again, I think, and honestly, I always say this, I think it's show, don't tell. And I think as
Yeah.
women, let's support one another, let's elevate, let's empower and champion each other as much as we can, because I do honestly think we're stronger together. And I would love to see a world where women do really support and come together and collaborate more. And I think that way we're going to make a far bigger impact in our society, in our culture. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's honestly been an absolute pleasure. And you've definitely got me thinking about a few things, and my brain's going to be going off on all different tangents now, which is fantastic. I love it. But where can people find out more about you and the amazing work that you're doing at Canva?
Yeah, look, first of all, Georgie, thank you so much for having me. And it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I could talk for hours about women in tech, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm amazed that we've been able to keep it under an hour, but it's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Stephanie Zuniga-Maher. I'm probably the only Zuniga-Maher in the world, so it's been pretty easy to find. But yeah, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. We'll put all the links below. And thank you so much for coming on today, Stephanie. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoy these episodes, the number one thing you can do to help us grow and keep spreading our mission and message is to hit the subscribe button. And if you have time, give us a quick rating. Appreciate each and every one of you who tune in every week. And we look forward to bringing you many more episodes this year. Take care.